Liam's world narrowed to the sterile whiteness of hospital walls and the distant hum of monitors reminding him that time was slipping through his fingers like sand. What had begun as a faint headache months ago had morphed into something darker and more unforgiving. A malignant brain tumor that refused to bow to radiation and chemotherapy, demanding instead a scalpel's intrusion deep within his skull. The prognosis was grave, the surgery perilous, and yet he faced it all with the fierce determination that had carried him through every trial life had thrown at him, never imagining that this battle would also tear at the frail threads of the love quadrangle that bound him to Steffy, to Finn, to hope, and to the ghosts of promises made and broken. When Steffy first entered his room, her face a mask of composed concern, he caught his breath at the sight of her. Her hair swept back in a loose ponytail, her designer jacket abandoned on the love seat so that she might sit more comfortably at his bedside, and felt the old magnetic pull that had drawn them together years ago, before betrayal, before broken vows, before the world had taught them to guard their hearts with barbed wire. She pressed his hand gently, so gently that he wondered whether this was a visitation of memory or of the real, living woman who had once shared his laughter and tears. Beneath her calm exterior, her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and in that instant Liam realized that despite all the new alliances and new loyalties the past seasons had enforced upon them, the bond between them was still alive, flickering like a candle in the wind. As the surgeon outlined the risks, possible loss of speech, paralysis on one side, even death. Steffy perched on the edge of the bed, her silk scarf slipping off her shoulder, and whispered words of encouragement that seemed to evoke their first days together, those halcyon moments of unguarded intimacy before the world intruded. Finn's voice crackled through her phone as she took every opportunity to update him, but as Liam's condition worsened, every ring, every page, chipped away at her resolve. Her heart pounded with panic and something more ancient, more primal. A longing she had sworn was buried when she married Finn, a loyalty she promised to honor for better and worse. Night stretched into day, and Steffy never left Liam's side. She held his hand through tremors of fear, brushed invisible lint from his coat, read passages from his favorite books aloud, and at times allowed herself to rest her cheek against his palm, her tears falling quietly onto his skin. In those fragile hours before surgery, as Liam's breathing synchronized with the pulse in her wrist, she found herself drifting back to moments when their love was simple and unchallenged, the stolen kisses beneath the eucalyptus trees, the tender proposal under a summer sky, the easy camaraderie that made every crisis bearable. In those memories, she tasted a sweetness that no betrayal had ever fully washed away, and she feared that if Liam slipped from her grasp, she would be haunted for the rest of her days by the knowledge that she let her vow to Finn blind her to the truth of her own heart. The night before the operation, the hospital corridors fell silent as the world outside snored under a blanket of stars. Steffy entered Liam's room bearing fresh sheets of sketches he used to draw on hospital napkins. Design ideas for a charity fashion show he and she had once planned to host together. They lay side by side in the twin beds Eric had hastily arranged for her overnight stay, and Liam reached for her, the simplest gesture heavy with years of unspoken longing. "Steffy," he rasped, voice barely above a whisper, "I don't want to leave this world without telling you what you mean to me." She hovered above him as though afraid to awaken from a dream, her heart twisting in guilt and desire. "Liam," she answered, Finn," but he silenced her with a gentle shake of his head, and in his tired eyes she saw the reflection of her truest self, a self unbound by any vow she had taken, a self that still ached for him. "I know," he said, "but life is too short for what-ifs. If I wake up tomorrow, I want to know where your heart lies." Steffi's breath caught, and in that unbearable moment, she felt the weight of her choice press against her chest like a stone. She pressed her lips against his trembling cheek, her tears falling onto the pillow between them, and made a silent promise. If Liam survived, she would tear down every wall she'd built around her love for Finn. She would face the consequences of her heart's true desire. And she would stand by Liam as fiercely as she had ever stood by any man. Surgery day arrived with a cacophony of urgency. Doctors in green scrubs brushed past, nurses administered last-minute sedatives, and the beeping monitors tracked Liam's final waking moments. Steffy stood at the foot of the operating table as his fingers curled around her gloved hand. Finn, summoned by a nurse's phone call, appeared at the doorway with a face drawn in lines of sorrow. And for one fractured instant the three of them shared a tableau of broken faith and shaken alliances. Finn's eyes met Steffy's, and she saw the betrayal in them, sharp as a blade, yet tempered by love that refused to let her go. He offered her a nod, no words, no accusations, only the quiet acknowledgement that whatever lay ahead, their bond had reached a fault line it might never cross again. Then Liam was whisked away, his face inscrutable beneath the mask, and Steffy stood in the hallway as the door swung closed, her world suspended on a pinpoint of hope and fear. The hours that followed were an eternity. Steffy paced the waiting room, clutching Liam's midnight blue jacket to her chest, her wedding ring a cold reminder of vows made in sunshine and kept in darkness. Finn remained by her side, his presence a ghostly comfort, silent as a sentinel, a partner in grief yet a rival she could not bring herself to resent fully. They shared glances heavy with unspoken apologies and unshed tears, two souls adrift in the storm of their own making. Then, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, the surgeon emerged, fatigue etched into every crease of his surgical mask. Steffy rushed forward, heart pounding so loudly she feared he would hear it beyond the doors. Finn closed the gap beside her, and together they listened to the words that would change their lives. The operation was a success. We removed the tumor and his vitals are stable. He's in recovery now, but he'll need time and therapy. He's strong, he has you. Relief and euphoria crashed through Steffy's veins like a tidal wave, and she burst into tears, burying her face against Finn's shoulder even as joy leapt in her chest at the thought that Liam would live. Finn, surprising her with his compassion, wrapped an arm around her and whispered, "He's going to be okay." In that moment she felt the old distinctions melt away. Ex-wife, husband, friend, all labels dissolved in the raw elation that Liam had survived. When Steffy finally re-entered Liam's recovery room, the beeping monitors now gentle companions rather than ominous watchmen, she found him propped against crisp white pillows, his dark hair damp with sweat, his smile weak but unmistakable. Finn hovered at the foot of the bed, offering Liam an encouraging thumbs up. Liam's eyes darted between them, confusion blooming into gratitude as he realized Steffy was still there, that Finn had honored his love for her by staying close, that amidst the wreckage of broken promises someone had woven a fragile tapestry of support. Steffy pulled a chair close and took his hand, glancing at Finn with a silent plea, and Finn rose, his jaw clenched but his expression generous. "I'll give you two," he began, stepping back, and Steffy followed his lead, moving beside him as though to shield him from her own turmoil, even as her heart soared at being near Liam. Finn nodded and slipped out, leaving them alone, and at last the promise Steffy had whispered in the pre-dawn darkness unfurled in the quiver of Liam's gaze. She leaned over, her lips trembling, and pressed her lips to his with a tenderness born of fear and relief. Liam closed his eyes, drew her into the promise of his arms, and for that perfect moment the world healed its own wounds. Steffy felt the thrum of a new beginning, the reckless beauty of her own heart's truth, and despite the knowledge that she had shattered vows and faces would turn in heartbreak, she resolved that nothing would keep her from reclaiming the love that had always defined her, Liam's. As they clung to each other, the monitors behind them tracking every spark of life, Steffy knew that when he healed, when he stood whole again, they would walk away from the crossroads of betrayal into a future forged by courage, by choice, and by the unwavering belief that love, once set free, would guide them through whatever storms lay ahead. As Liam's strength slowly returned and he began the delicate process of relearning to trust his own body, the fragile new world that he and Steffy had dared to imagine together bloomed with the tentative promise of second chances, until the reverberations of her choice swept through every corner of their intertwined lives, threatening to shatter fragile peace and ignite a conflagration of heartbreak, guilt, and unspoken longing. Steffy visited Liam every morning at dawn, her footsteps silent on the linoleum as she slipped into his recovery room, where she found him propped on pillows, sweat-slick hair plastered to his forehead, eyes bright with the relief of survival and the hope of days to come. Their fingers intertwined as she reviewed his physical therapy exercises, gentle stretches to coax movement back into limbs numbed by trauma, leaning close to whisper encouragements that needed no rehearsal. "You're doing so well, my love." Every day, a little stronger. In those moments, the hospital room felt sacred, insulated from the prying eyes and complicated loyalties that roiled beyond its doors. Yet Steffy carried with her the heavy knowledge that a storm was gathering on the horizon, fueled by Finn's silent anguish and Hope's growing consternation at the shifting alliances around her. Finn, who had waited in the shadows for each update, visited only sparingly. Once to deliver new prescriptions, once to inquire after metastasis scans, and once more simply to stand at the foot of Liam's bed, his face an impassive mask that barely concealed the sorrow in his eyes. He greeted Steffy with a curt nod, his voice calm but distant, and in that brief exchange she sensed the chasm opening between them. A rift she had knowingly carved to pursue her own heart's desire, yet found herself unprepared to navigate once the veneer of righteousness wore thin. Meanwhile, Hope Logan paced the corridors outside, torn between empathy for Liam's life-threatening ordeal and a mounting apprehension that Steffy's renewed intimacy with him spelled disaster for her own quiet allegiance to Finn. Though Hope and Finn had once stood side by side through betrayals and broken trust, their bond now felt brittle in the face of Steffy's defiant declaration to reunite with Liam. Hope found herself reliving her own entanglements with both men. Memories of Finn's steadfast devotion during her most vulnerable times, echoes of Liam's impulsive vows and heartache, and she wondered if true loyalty could ever be so easily surrendered. Each night she lay awake in her father's guest wing, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince herself that Steffy's choice was a matter between two hearts, not hers to judge. Yet her chest tightened whenever she pictured Finn's haunted expression as he watched Steffy leaning over Liam's bed, her cheeks flushed with tears of relief at his survival. Finally, driven by a mixture of compassion and foreboding, Hope resolved to speak with Finn. To stand before him not as an adversary, but as the only friend who might anchor him amidst the tidal wave of betrayal she feared was coming. She found him in the Forrester Infirmary wing, pacing the antiseptic hallway with clenched fists, and approached quietly until he stopped and turned, his gaze leveling on her with that gentle sincerity that had once made her heart light. "I know this is hard," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "and I'm sorry you're in pain, both physical and otherwise." Finn's lips parted in a fleeting half-smile before his shoulders slumped. "She chose him," he said simply, as though that sentence contained the sum of every wound. Hope reached out, hesitated, then placed a hand on his arm. "You loved her enough to stay," she reminded him, "even when it hurt you to watch her with Liam." His eyes flickered with gratitude for her kindness, yet shadowed regret spoke louder than any thanks. Hope squeezed his arm and whispered, "Whatever happens, you deserve more than silent suffering." Finn nodded once, and though no words bridged the distance between them, the unspoken understanding that passed between them set Hope's heart thrumming with empathy and dread. As whispers of Steffy's imminent separation from Finn spread through the corridors of Forrester Creations, Ridge and Brooke, each carrying their own burdens, felt the tremors of a love quadrangle about to snap under the strain of scandal and desire. Ridge, still buoyed by the faith he had placed in his mother to protect Brooke's legacy, but mindful of Steffy's own tumultuous past with Liam, emerged from a board meeting to find Brooke seated in the executive lounge, her face pale but resolute. He offered her a gentle smile and took the seat beside her, realizing that no matter how fiercely he argued for innovation or tradition, the cruel calculus of the heart often overrode all corporate logic. "She's going to be with him," Ridge said softly, nodding towards Steffy's old office down the hall, now empty except for a lone sketchbook lying open on the desk. Brooke's gaze followed his, her lips pressed into a thin line. "She's choosing Liam over Finn," Brooke replied, her voice steady though her heart trembled. She folded her hands in her lap, her wedding ring glinting in the soft light. "I've seen that look in Steffy's eyes before, the one that tells me she's determined to follow her heart. Consequences be damned." Ridge exhaled, running a hand through his silvering hair. "It's messy," he admitted, "but it's also real. Finn loves her, and so does Liam. If she feels life or death in one man over the other, what can we say?" Brooke rested her head on Ridge's shoulder, and in that moment they shared a rare quiet, a recognition that no matter how many seasons they endured, the unpredictable nature of love would always outmaneuver the best-laid plans for boardroom stability or familial approval. Steffy, for her part, found herself straddling two worlds as Liam's condition stabilized and the specter of death receded. The tender sanctuary of reclaimed love with Liam, and the guilt-laden ruins of a marriage she had once believed unbreakable with Finn. One afternoon, as the California sun speared through the slats of the hospital blinds, Steffy and Liam sat side by side, he in a sturdy hospital chair, she perched on its arm, going through old photo albums she had brought to buoy his spirits. Each photograph, a candid snapshot of a wedding day, a candid selfie on a beach vacation, a quiet moment captured in the Forrester garden rekindled memories of innocence before betrayal and times when their laughter had flowed as freely as the Malibu tide. Liam smiled tenderly, brushing a hand over her hair, his thumb skimming the nape of her neck. "You look like you've been on a long journey," he murmured, his voice rough from 4 weeks of intubation and reconstruction. Steffy's eyes glistened with tears she refused to shed in public, and she closed the album with a decisive snap. "I have," she replied. "I've been traveling between what my heart tells me and what my vows demanded. Some journeys we're not meant to avoid, no matter how dangerous." Liam reached for her hand and squeezed it firmly. "Then we'll travel it together," he said. His eyes, once clouded by fear of losing her, now shone with the fierce certainty that she had always belonged by his side. Steffy leaned her head against his shoulder, and for a moment she allowed herself the luxury of forgetting every promise she had broken, every tear she'd caused Finn, and every whispered apology she owed Hope. In that sliver of time, there was only the two of them and the fragile hope that love could heal wounds, both physical and emotional, if only they dared to surrender completely. But the reckoning Steffy knew must come began to gather its weight the moment Finn received word of their reunion. Finn, who had guarded his heart for so long, found himself racked by a pain that eclipsed any physical suffering he had ever endured. He wandered the halls of the hospital like a ghost, imagining every whispered laugh he no longer shared with Steffy, every memory she now reclaimed with Liam, each tender glance she reserved for another man. Their few interactions. Steffy's quick smile in the hallway, Liam's startled glance as Finn passed his room door, became tiny daggers to Finn's heart. He sought out Hope's counsel once more, finding her in the nurse's lounge, stirring tea as though its warmth might soothe her as it once had soothed him. He recounted Steffy's last words to Liam, the promise she made in the dim dawn hours, and her kiss that marked the irrevocable shift in her allegiance. Hope's face fell as she processed the depth of his pain, yet she found herself torn between her own feelings for Finn and the empathy she bore for Steffy's desperate desire to reclaim a love she believed worth any sacrifice. "You have every right to your pain, Finn," Hope told him softly, "and I will stand by you as long as you need. But some choices, once made, cannot be undone." Finn watched her, his gaze both grateful and forlorn. "I loved her enough to let her choose," he whispered, "but did I love her enough to hold on?" Hope reached across, covering his hand with hers, and for one fleeting moment their unspoken bond flickered like a candle in a gusting wind, threatened by the very forces that had once drawn them together. In the aftermath of Liam's triumphant discharge, an event marked by cheering hospital staff, floral bouquets, and the flash of camera phones from eager onlookers, Steffy and Liam stepped into a borrowed car, their hands still entwined, their smiles bright with relief. They spoke little, content to feel the warmth of the sun on Liam's face and the steadiness of Steffy's fingers curled around his. Yet as they approached Steffy's home, the sprawling estate that had once echoed with laughter and now felt poised to witness both her greatest joy and deepest sorrow, an unwelcome sight greeted them at the driveway. Finn's car, sleek and black, idling beneath an ancient oak, its engine off, but its presence undeniable. Liam's grip on Steffy's hand tightened as he recognized the make. Steffy's breath caught as she realized that the moment of truth she had postponed was at hand. They paused, locked in each other's gaze, each understanding that the sanctuary they had created in the hospital must yield to the complicated reality of their choices. Steffy drew in a quivering breath and turned toward the car. "It's time," she whispered, her voice taut as piano wire. Liam nodded, his hand brushing back her hair. "Together," he affirmed. They walked forward side by side, hearts pounding, ready to face the fallout of a love that had dared to defy every vow and expectation, knowing that the next chapter of their story would be written not in the quiet corners of hospital rooms, but in the raw openness of confrontation and confession, between Steffy and Finn, between Liam and